The Last Thing You Surrender came out in 2019, and it was a novel of World War II, and it's about these two families. It's about George, who is a white. In the first novel, he's a this white teenage Marine who is nearly killed at Pearl Harbor, but his life is saved by this black messman whom George has sort of seen but never really registered. And the black messman dies, and George goes back to Mobile. He's injured. He goes back to Mobile to play a condolence call on the man's widow, and this sort of begins a relationship, a correspondence between the two of them that is obviously officially not allowed in by the mores of Alabama in the 1940s. So it's about them through the war, about George, being captured by the Japanese and having to endure, the brutalities of the Japanese prisoner of war camp. It's about the woman Thelma and her experiences stateside. She works in a shipyard that is the site of a riot by white workers who are upset that black workers, are getting promotions that they don't think they should get. And it's also about Thelma's brother Luther, who, when he was 9 and Thelma was 3, they saw their parents brutally murdered at their front door by a lynch mob. They saw their parents burned alive and dismembered at their front door. Thelma can't remember it, but Luther can't forget it, and it's left him with this fury and this anger with America and with white folks in particular. And it's about him, working through that and going to war, risking his life basically on behalf of a country that he hates, and discovering, as my publisher put it, a different kind of patriotism, or a kind of patriotism that works for him as he goes fighting. His unit is involved in the liberation of a concentration camp in Europe, which really sort of changes his thinking, or deeply impacts his thinking. There's a line in there that I was really proud of, that I put in his narrative, something to the effect of, he had always known that white people hated black people, but he didn't know that it was possible for white people to hate other white people because they weren't the right kind of white. And it sort of broadens his understanding of what hatred, the weight and the price of hatred, racial hatred. So that's the first novel, The Last Thing You Surrender. Then the second novel takes those same characters 20 years later and plunks them down into the middle of the voting rights campaign. And there were two things I wanted to accomplish with that too. There were two bits of unfinished business that I felt were left from The Last Thing You Surrender. One was that the guy that led the lynch mob that killed Thelma and Luther's parents, there was never any accountability for him. I couldn't figure out a way for him to be held accountable within the context of that first book. So in the second novel, which again takes place, 20 years later and 40 some years after the lynching, Luther encounters this man in a nursing home, and he is enfeebled, he is helpless, and he is completely at Luther's mercy. And so the question is, what does justice demand? That's the question that Luther spends the book grappling with. As for Thelma, she is forced to return. By this time, she has left Alabama and traveled to New York, and she and George have gotten married. But she's forced to return to Alabama for the first time in 20 years to rescue her son, who's gone missing after participating in the voting rights campaign and the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge that culminated in the Bloody Sunday beatings. She's come back to rescue him because he's discovered a grim family secret that causes him to question everything that he thought he knew about who he is and who his mother is. So that's 54 miles.